Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to another session of our Book in the Spotlight, which today is focused on the fragmentary Greek Chronicles after Eusebius, which was published by Peter van Nuffelen and Lieve van Hoof with Cambridge University Press just a few months ago. Today, Peter van Nuffelen will present the book, and afterwards, Monica Berti will be the discussant. And afterwards, there will also be time for questions from the audience. So I will first introduce both Peter van Nuffelen and Monica Berti, and then they will both have the time to present and respond. And afterwards, it will be time for the questions. So Peter van Nuffelen is professor for the cultural history of the ancient world in the history department of Ghent University. He's previously held positions at the universities of Leuven and Exeter. His main research interests are the history of religion in the ancient world, cultural history of late antiquity, and literature and history of late antiquity. In his work, he combines philological approaches with wider interpretations, relying on texts in Greek, Latin, and Oriental languages. And he has won several awards, no need to list them here, and he has been the recipient of 2 ERC grants. Monica Berti is professor of ancient history at the University of Leipzig and has previously held posts at the University of Roma Tor Vergata and Tufts University, and she has also been visiting professor at the University of Turin. As a classicist and digital humanist, her research is focused on the Greco-Roman world and the computational analysis of ancient Greek and Latin. She has won numerous awards, fellowships, and grants, including from the DFG, for a project that she leads in Leipzig called Text-Based Extraction, Analysis, and Annotation of Ancient Greek References to Authors and Works. This project provides a full database of lemmatized and annotated named entities pertaining to words and expressions of bibliographic citations in ancient sources. So now, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you all the people of the TeTra seminar to give me the opportunity to present our most recent publication. Lieve sends her apologies, Lieve van Hoof. She is lecturing somewhere in the fields of Flanders. I've prepared a very short presentation to give you something to look at beyond my own face, and so I'll share that with you. This is the book I never wanted to work on, and it's not because I didn't like what we were doing, but because it has been hard work. I'll give you some more details on that. I'll first give some a little bit of background to how the volume came about. Then I'll give you some teasers about what's in it, and I'll sketch some broader issues. So this is really a product of the first ERC on late antique historiography. And part of what we wanted to do in the context of that project was to build an inventory of historiography in the period, simply to get to know what is there. And so that's the link you've got on the slide. But there was also a printed volume that resulted from it. And this is really a quick overview of other things that we've done within the project, including, as you can see in the center of the slide, another volume of fragmentary histories. Now this volume wasn't really planned in the project, but when we started working on the database, on the inventory, we started to come across really interesting material that hadn't received much attention. But when looking at it, we realized that it would involve quite some extensive discussions of issues like the Easter date, calculation of the age of the world, and all these kinds of intricate discussions. And that's one of the reasons that I wasn't very keen on doing this. On the other hand, at the same time, in that time we had at Ghent a group of people who could actually had the skills, the linguistic skills, to actually work on this material, because the title says Greek Chronicles, but much of, or for particular authors, much has been recovered from especially the Armenian, but also Syriac and Arabic tradition. So this is really very much a collaborative volume involving all the people you see there. Most of the collaborators, Maria Contano, Focanti, Andy Paniotis, Panos, who was here, Mariana Mazzola, and then Stephanie Bambakian, had very specific skills for particular languages, whereas my role was more, and that of Lieve, besides Lieve working also on the Greek material, was trying to keep everything together and to write commentaries. This is a copy of the table of content. So the numbering stems from the fact that the previous volume on Latin histories started from number 1, and so we had to number them, but then from 100. This is a very varied group, a mixed bag. There's not enough time to dwell on details, but just to what I would just want to raise one point, which will come back later, is that we make a distinction between chronica and chronographies. And chronica are really what we usually think chronicles are, namely year-by-year entries. So from a particular point until another particular point in time, so giving historical information. Chronographies are really collections of material about time and about history, usually lists of rulers, but also Easter calculations and that kind of thing. So one of the things you see immediately from this slide is that there's quite a lot of chronographies in this set. So we go roughly from after Eusebius until some point in the 7th century, the last two Isidore the Deacon, Pyro. We can't actually date them very precisely, but that's roughly the scope. These are really we didn't. I mean, depending on what you consider a fragmentary historian, we, for example, should also have edited Eusebius, for which we don't have the original Greek. We haven't been that mad. So that's also one reason of starting after Eusebius. Now, what were reasons to produce this collection? First of all, there wasn't any collection of these authors, and a number of them were hardly visible in scholarship. Some had been worked on, mostly Panodorus and Anianas of Alexandria. They had received some attention. The group of authors from Pseudo-Eusebius until Theophilus, number 6 until 9, they come from the Chronicle of John Malalas, had received some attention within that work, but very little beyond that. There is quite a number of new material that, and really new in the sense that there are really very few people who've actually had a look at it. Mostly comes from the Armenian tradition, where Andy has been incredibly diligent in finding new material, up to the point that at one point I said, well, just stop now, as we have to get this volume out. Although most of the last things he found are usually derivative from things that are in the collection, so there is no real loss from making that really pragmatic decision. The other impetus for making this collection refers to the four, or actually six, two in the dubia as well, fragmentary authors that are only attested in the Chronicle of Malalas, so the 6th century chronicler. The sources of Malalas have that are only attested in Malalas have often been dismissed as being invented by him. I'm one of the people who think that is a little bit too severe on Malalas, and I think definitely for the four people that we edited, I think you can make a case that the profiles that emerge from the passages quoted by Malalas is coherent enough to indicate that there's a good likelihood that these are actually lost texts. And I think we have to really reverse the burden of evidence. It's not up to us to prove that a source cited by Malalas is authentic. It's up to the others to prove that it's not authentic. I already hinted at the fact that we really needed a very wide linguistic expertise that was luckily available at that time in Ghent. And a last reason is methodology. One of the things that the project wanted to do was to introduce the methodology used to edit fragmentary historians that is quite common for classical Greek and Latin historiography, and mostly pioneered or developed by Felix Jacobi in the Fragments der griechischen Historiker, to introduce that to the later period. Because a lot of people who work on later historiography or later texts in general have had a tendency to conflate addition of fragments and reconstruction of the work. And we think it is important that what a collection of fragments should do is give the reader an idea of the material that is there, lay out its problems, offer maybe up to a certain point solutions, but still take a fairly, in a way, conservative approach, rather than identifying on grounds of shared subject matter or shared style or whatever passages that are not identified by the source itself as belonging to the lost author. And for the Latin history fragments, the reviewer noticed our skeptical approach, and I think, I mean, it's definitely not the last word. Skepticism can't be the last word, but it's definitely a good starting point to look critically at some of these authors and material where hypothesis has been built on hypothesis. Why should you read this book? Well, nobody will read this from cover from beginning to end, but some of the nice bits in the volume are that the first author, Andreas, has the earliest attestation of the 6th, well, one of the earliest attestations of the 6th of January as the birthday of Jesus, dated to 352. I mean, the author is writing 352. Birth of Christ is of course a little bit earlier. And that has, and in relation, some other material that is in Andreas has helped, I think, to solve some of the issues relating to debates about the Easter date at the Council of Nicaea. There is a paper forthcoming on that. Another nice bit, Eusebius of Epiphania, not terribly well known, but he is the only chronicler, a Greek chronicler particular in late antiquity that takes the chronology of the Hebrew Bible as the norm. And so he ends up with a chronology roughly, well, until the birth of Christ, which is about 1,000 years younger than what you find in mainstream Greek chronology that builds on Eusebius, where the Septuagint becomes the norm, potentially corrected by the Hebrew Bible, but not strictly following the Hebrew Bible. That's really a curious thing. I'm not entirely sure why he did so. We have also tried to rewrite a bit the history of the genre, which is usually told as sort of a continuous development of subsequent innovations. So you have Eusebius, who is then corrected by Panadorus and Annianus in the early 5th century, and then they supposedly influenced the rest of Greek chronography up until the 6th, 7th century, and even later until the year 800, when Byzantine chronography really takes off again. I think we can, or we argue in the volume that actually authors like Andreas, but also Annianus, probably lingered in a dusty library for over a century, and they were actually only rediscovered at the end of the reign of Justinian in the context of the debates about the date of Christmas. So when Justinian tried to impose the 25th of December as date of Christmas on the Church of Jerusalem, and that generated the debate that is reflected with serious distortions in the Armenian accounts on Andreas and Hieron. But if you read them against the grain, you do get a good sense of these of both sides in this debate, looking for earlier material. On the one hand, Annianus, who supports the 25th of December, Andreas, who supports the 6th of January. So looking for earlier material to support their position. That feeds also into the debate. These debates led to the more intense reflection about the age of the world that we see around 600. So, and that's the beginning of the development of what would lead to be the Byzantine era. So with the creation of the world dated to 5508. I already hinted at the fact that if you put our material in context of the preserved things, that you'll see very clearly that in Greek, chronographies dominate, so not chronicles and not this analytic year by year. I think they are there, but they're not dominant. And this is really the contrast, a real clear contrast with the Latin tradition, which is heavily influenced by Jerome's translation of Eusebius' Chronicle, or the second part of Eusebius' Chronicle, which is exactly an analytic account. Just to conclude, I want to stress that I think this volume will be the beginning of the debate, definitely not the end. I think by having the material hopefully collected in a decent way that people can work with it, will hopefully spur new interest, will undoubtedly lead people to identify some mistakes that we have made, maybe challenges to what to some of the interpretations that we offered, but at least there is now a collection that allows that kind of work to be done without having to plow through extensive amounts of literature. And to conclude, I really want to emphasize that this has only been possible thanks to the collaboration with all the people who were involved in this project. People with lots of talents, lots of knowledge of languages that I do not master sufficiently well. But it's by bringing together this material that we've hopefully been able to bring something new. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Monica, do you want to respond?
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Excellent. So, Peter, thank you for presenting the volume, and also in general to TeTra. So, thank you for having me. Well, I have, let's say, three main questions for this discussion, and I will not pursue specific questions about the chronographic material of this volume, but I would like to address, let's say, more general and challenging questions about methodological and editorial challenges of editing fragments. And also, as you said, nobody will read this book from the beginning to the end, as it happens normally with editions of fragmentary text. They are meant to be consulted. But I have to say that the introduction to this volume is extremely interesting and very clear for the distinction between chronica and chronographies. So I think that, and it's good also for understanding a fascinating component of this volume, because we have very different languages, and I will go back to the question of languages. But I would like to start with, let's say, first question concerning the structure of this volume, of this edition, within the broader framework of the entire project. As far as I see, so the volume includes 15 authors, and there is also a section with Lubia, with other 5 authors. And an interesting question is about the criteria used to distinguish between testimonia and fragmenta, which is a distinction that represents a consolidated practice in editions of fragmentary authors. And you mentioned, of course, also other editions of fragmentary text, including the edition by Jacobi. So my question is about the criteria used for distinguishing between testimonia and fragmenta, if you had specific or general challenges in that, and also if you have, let's say, a few examples of internal features or principles that guided your ordering the fragments. So this collection is arranged by authors. Within each author, we have testimonia and fragmenta, and then I see that there is, let's say, an order for testimonia and fragmenta. So can you say something about the order? Did you have challenges in ordering, in structuring the source text? This is the first question.
Yes, thank you, Monica. Yes, so the distinction between testimony and fragments, I find that always a difficult one, and we have been inclined to, in case of doubt, the idea for those who aren't in this particular kind of work. So a testimonium is, one would say, is something that a citing authority says about the author or the work, whereas a fragment is really a quotation from the work or a summary of contents. In case of doubt, we have ranked things as fragments, and the thing is that there are a number of instances where, for example, St. Gallis is reporting on Annianus and his structure of his work, and then it flows into sort of an assessment, or it gives some information of what's then in there. So, for simply to avoid sort of having to refer back to earlier testimony that are also fragments, we mostly put them in as fragments. The structure and ordering of that is a good point, because if you start reading it carefully, you will notice some differences. In the case of no, I think we have. So we have definitely for the authors that are better attested, for which we have more material. So we often have fragments that say the same thing, or that comment on the same thing. So we've tried to group them. There are often underneath also lines of transmission when that happens. Within an overall attempt of sort of giving the fragments in an order that how shall I put it, potentially reflects the way they would have occurred in the original work, in the sense that some also for Andreas, for example, we have things that seem to come from a preface or from a theoretical discussion, and then later we do have also you have certain things that relate to different moments in time. So in a chronicle, normally the older things come before the younger things. For Anianus, which is a bit of a complex case, we have rather followed an order by a transmitting tradition. So the Greek fragments come first, and then the Syriac, and then the Arabic. That doesn't create too much of a turmoil in the structure because they transmit also very different things. So the Syriac really transmits mostly tiny or references to lists, etc., whereas the Greek is almost entirely concerned with things that seem to belong to introductory discussions. So there is a little bit of so that there we haven't, so we decided for a different structure. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, excellent. Yes, thank you. And of course, ordering is always, problematic, and also the distinction between testimonial and fragmenta sometimes, or at least many times, we have to repeat the same text because they can be both, testimonial and fragmenta. But the question of the language is extremely interesting, and I would like to ask about languages. This is really the second question, because I think that one of the most fascinating aspects of the project, the entire project, is that it brings together different languages: Latin, Armenian, Syriac, Arabic sources, in addition to Greek ones. And also in the introduction to the volume, you highlight the distinct trajectories, I'm citing you, the distinct trajectories of chronicle writing in Greek, Latin, and Syriac. And in the introduction, there is a very clear description of these different, let's say, trajectories in terms of genre in these three languages. But my question is about the role of the language or the languages as, let's say, the cover text. And here I'm using an expression well known, especially to scholars of ancient Greek fragmentary historiography. This expression was coined, as you know, by Guido Scapens, for referring to the transmitting text covering the quoted text. But can we, let's say, consider also languages as covering something else? And I think that there are examples in these fragments. So my question is about, so can we identify, do you have examples of linguistic patterns for expressing chronology in general? I know that this is a complex topic, but linguistic patterns for expressing chronology that recur in fragments in different languages and that mediate or cover the original lost text or the language in which a particular concept was initially conceived or expressed. So of course we have, as you mentioned also in the book, so we have this chronographic material traveled across linguistic and cultural boundaries. So the question is about the language as covering other languages, and maybe we have traces of a language in another language, also at the level of syntax or words. And in this case, of course, we have pregnant expressions about chronology. So this is my question, my second question.
Thanks a lot. Well, there are a number of people here who can actually answer some of your questions, some parts of your question better than I can do, especially when it comes to sort of the vocabulary. But it is, for example, in Syriac, you do encounter chronicon, but you also encounter other formula for chronography or for history in general. but the others can come in if they want to give more detailed examples of that. It is, but I think from the perspective of the volume in general, it's not something that we have dwelt upon extensively, although in some instances it does play a role when we try to determine, for example, the original title or scope of Andreas, because then we do consider, okay, what was the various titles or designations that we find in the Armenian material, and to what extent does it reflect the certain Greek things. Definitely for the Armenian, I mean, I think one of the problems we were confronted with when working on the Armenian text is that they are mostly coming from a context of calendar reckoning, which with some quite abstruse vocabulary, which was not always easy to translate or identify. So that was a real issue. And so I do think that I mean, other people can still make serious steps forward there. And then I briefly want to come back to this idea of cover text, because that is indeed an important concept. And beyond the linguistic element, for example, it is clear, especially the Armenian tradition is very much shaped by a certain conception of what happened in the 6th or in the 4th, and then later in the 6th century, that influences very heavily how they represent things. And it is also clearly the case that there are lots of interpolations, reinterpretations of what Andreas is supposed to have said to accommodate his work with the views on Armenian calendar and chronography in later periods. Again, that is an area where still much more work can be done. But I see a hand by Stephanie, who can definitely say more about this.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Yes, if I may, I'll just make a quick comment. In my opinion, the Armenian situation is made more complicated by the fact that there isn't a lot of tradition in translating these type of texts. So our dictionaries just aren't very good for this type of technical vocabulary. So we're still sort of mapping the technical glossary, the right lexicon. So it was the case very often that if you look up some of the terms that came up in this text, you just couldn't find the right translation. But it's not like Armenians didn't have the concept, is that we as scholars haven't yet covered that area successfully enough. And second, I would just say, again, I agree absolutely that the texts were not particularly pretty. They did seem to have been played with a bit, transmissed in a sort of a slightly chaotic way. So they're not very, very pretty. So we can't possibly blame people before us, who decided to engage with slightly prettier histories. Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thanks.
Well, thank you. So I think that definitely, so this volume is not the end, but the beginning, and this multilingual aspect is interesting. So the challenge of translating these texts. So thank you. And I think really is the beginning for many questions. And then a last question, of course, given that I'm interested, as you may know, in digital stuff, I will ask a question about the database, because there is also a database of the project, which is accessible online as the Clavis Historicorum Antiquitatis Posterioris, and the database collects all historiographical works in Latin, Greek, Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, Arabic, Coptic, and also to a lesser extent Hebrew, Aramaic, and Persian. So I think this is another super valuable resource of the project. And interesting is that it's possible to browse the database by author and work, and also filters are interesting because you can filter your searches by confession, language, genre, and state of preservation. But of course, we can't talk about the entire database. But I have, one question, which is about your distinction between users and sources in the structure of the database. If you search, I have an example here also, well, for example, the Chronicle of Eusebius of Caesarea. So there is, let's say, an entry, quite rich of metadata, and there is a long list of users, and then after sources for Eusebius. So I'm interested in this distinction. And then, of course, I imagine that the other, let's say, assertion about state of preservation, fragmentary, which is interesting because by fragmentary, imagine we can mean quotations of lost text, fragments in this sense, or also excerpta. I mean, but I imagine that this is complex. But I'm really interested in this, for my final question, this distinction between users and sources. I can imagine it, but I would like to know a bit more from you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The basic distinction really is so sources are the ones that, in your example, Eusebius used to write his Chronicles, history, whatever, and then so users are the ones that actually use his material. So his history, sorry. The limitation of what we've done there is really that this is actually largely limited to historiographical sources. So actually the user section is the reverse image of sources for that other author. So so this really, so I mean, if with Eusebius you have I don't know, Simeon the logothete as a user. So in the entry for Simeon the logothete, if we have one, there should be as a source Eusebius. So it doesn't cover all sources that somebody used in order to compose his history. So it was really developed from the idea of trying to track within the genre how what is read by whom and how does it influence whom. That is a clear limitation, absolutely. And on your minor point of fragmentary and excerpta, now I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm trying to look very quickly. We definitely had at some point a distinction. Yeah, we do still have a distinction between excerpts and fragments, but that is also in some instances a bit of a tenuous one. I think you can, for the later period where you do have some clearly some manuscripts or texts that identify themselves, present themselves as excerpt collection, you can make that distinction. But I know that some scholars have argued for sort of erasing that distinction. I think looking at it from a more medieval or later perspective, I would still think it is a useful distinction, but I mean, there are people who think otherwise.
Well, of course, I know very well that structuring that in a digital environment is complex, because I mean, we have many possibilities, but then it begins the nightmare, because of course, structuring data, especially for us humanists, we would like to represent everything. But in any case, I like this structure. We have the author between the sources and the users. And so we can really see, we can really visualize in the database this complex process of using sources, being reused by other sources. So a continuous workflow. Anyway, so thank you very much for your answers. And I think that we can move on with the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much indeed to Peter van Nuffelen for giving us a glimpse into this fascinating volume that has just come out, and to Monica Berti for guiding the beginning of this discussion and bringing us a little bit deeper into specific topics and specific lines of interest that we can keep discussing. So the floor is now open for questions from all of you. We have multiple screens, so if you do have a question, please do raise your electronic hands or you can write it down in the chat. We can also read it for you. Maybe I can start us off with a very basic question on the structure once again of your volume, because I'm assuming that not all of us here in the audience have had the chance to open the book yet. So I was just wondering if you, Peter, can tell us a little bit more about what entered your commentary, because it is an additional translation and a commentary. And I'm assuming, and I can also know that there are differences throughout the volume in what themes you pick up on and what gets into the commentary. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So the idea is that so that there are lots of what my teachers used to call realia, the events, people, places, all of that in these fragments. We have all tried to identify them all, but we haven't focused on them. The commentary is mostly on trying to identify what the fragment brings to the issues that are directly relevant to the genre, to the reconstruction of the lost texts, to the debates that feed into it, so the Easter date and all of that. Of course, on occasion we have tried to, where it's relevant, try to trace some traditions, because definitely with the material from John Malala's, which is often I was about to say peculiar, but I probably should say unique in the ancient tradition. So we have tried to trace that back to its origins wherever possible. But commentaries mostly focus really indeed on helping to understand the text, and then what does this fragment bring to the reconstruction of the work and the issues that it engages with.
Thank you very much. I think Dan has a question.
Thank you very much to both speakers today and to authors for a very interesting book. So be looking for the book through very diverse material that goes across languages. Is it Armenian one of those that are more prominent? How is the balance between language in presenting these sources? And if one of them stands out in some way, whether that's down to chance or to local dynamics and things like that. Thank you very much.
So it's a book on Greek chronicles. So there, I think the dominant language would still be Greek, but for some authors, so especially Andreas Hiron and to a lesser degree Pseudo Epiphanius, Armenian is really the bulk of the material, and it is a bit. I mean, for those, especially for those two authors, they are unique in the collection in the sense that there's so much information on them in the Armenian tradition. From a certain point onwards, it's clear that, or it's very clear that it's becomes derivative from earlier Armenian authors, but still. So that makes that there. I mean, the look and also the feel of these the collection of this particular author will be very different from some of the others. There is a good set of Syriac material, but that's done indeed mostly for other authors. I mean, Andreas is interesting also because he is the one of the few cases where, by bringing together Armenian and Syriac, because he's not attested in Greek at all, so by bringing together these two, we do get quite a reasonably good profile of an author and of work. Latin is there, but it's a distant fifth language or whatever. Arabic is largely derivative from the Syriac, and so it has a minor importance, except for a few very interesting bits of text.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you indeed. You did say something about it. I think it was the case of Anianos that is preserved in different languages, but my question is whether it does happen that you have the same passage witnesses by multiple sources in or multiple languages, and what is your approach in those cases? If there's something particularly interesting, also some cases that really stand out.
Yeah. Yeah, so it occurs off the top of my head twice, I think, so that we have the same material in different languages. One is with Anianos and Syriac and Arabic, but that's really short bits and pieces. For Andreas, we do have the interesting luck of having, so he wrote probably as part of his chronography also a brief treatise account or whatever on the Easter cycle, which was also part of his chronography. And we have Syriac excerpts of that, as well as a shorter and a somewhat longer Armenian version of that text. And that was really instrumental also in showing that the Armenian text, or the two Armenian versions that we have, are clearly up to a degree trustworthy, can be traced back to probably to a single. I mean, it's clear that they copy from the same text, the Syriac and the Armenian. So that has helped us to stand on shore ground there. It also, conversely, of course, it has helped to better understand what the Syriac excerpts are actually saying. I mean, it has helped also to identify that the fact that the Syriac text that we have in Elias of Nisibis is in fact a series of excerpts and not a continuous text. So that those are two cases of this clear, where you clearly see the benefits, or when you have the luck of having the same material in different accounts.
Yeah, thank you. And I will pick up on something you said, answering Dan's question, because this book comes after a book on Latin fragmentary histories. So I was wondering whether we can gain something comparing the two volumes, if we see differences in the languages that are covered or the topics that are covered. What can we gain if we put these two volumes in dialogue with one another? I don't know if this is too broad of a question or if there's something that can be said there.
I think there will be very few people who actually read or consult both volumes, in the sense that the Latin fragmentary histories is very much, well, it's Latin only. It's for a big part, it's sort of secular history, political history, just a few bits of other types of texts, and also I think so one of the things that we've always been interested in trying to use this material to build a wider picture of how historiographical genres develop, also how they circulate. So one of the the things that sort of stands out between the Latin volume and the Greek Chronicles volume is that the most interesting material that we have in the Greek Chronicle volume is material that circulated very widely, and so also across linguistic boundaries. The most interesting material that we have for the Latin collection is material that did not circulate at all, or really in a very restricted circle. It's a bit, would take too much time to actually make that argument, but it's also in introduction to that volume. But it does suggest something about the milieus in which this particular type of text circulated. Also may tell us something about how Latin historical writing from the 6th century onwards becomes a much rarer or particular activity if you're not looking at Chronicles. If you start looking at Chronicles, of course, then there is much more material. So that's indeed, when you start comparing both, you have to keep that distinction in mind as well.
Fascinating. Thank you. I think Dan has a question.
You mentioned that towards the end of your presentation of the book that rather than an end, this book is a beginning as a tool and many other ways. What is the most obvious salient direction that you would like to see this material put to work towards?
Oh, well, first of all, I hope people put it to work in directions that I can't envisage yet. Well, it is clear that there is an awful lot of material here on time reckoning, Easter calculation, and so that I hinted at debates about the origin of the Byzantine era. That's something we discussed very briefly, but there like people who know more about this could definitely do more with what we've offered there. I would maybe also, I think it will invite people maybe also to rethink maybe the ways in which more generally we narrate the development of certain genres, literary genres within a Christian context, and definitely within historiography, there has been a tendency to sort of jump from big name to big name, and there is actually much more that needs, or the canvas is actually much richer. And I think one of the things we also do in the introduction is actually showing how mixed the reception of the Chronicle of Eusebius of Caesarea actually was. So I think in that direction, maybe that can inspire people to do something similar for other genres as well. And then finally, I do think I hope maybe that people will consult this and then say, "Ha, I have found something, or I know of something that you haven't noticed yet," which well, we will. So then, well, I know that would imply that we would have to do a second updated edition. I'm not sure if I have the stomach to do that, but I do hope it will help people to have sort of a portmanteau where they can put things on in order to expand the field.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Let me see if we have other questions. Yes, there is one in the chat from Maria Tomadaki that says, "Many congratulations on this interesting book. Is there any case with other languages were helpful for restoring a Greek text?"
No. Hang on. No, well, generally no. I mean, there is an instance where I think it's Pseudo Epiphanius who copies part of what must have been a piece from Eusebius' Chronicle. Now we do have the Greek text or equivalent bits of the Greek text in St. Callas. And so it is the sort of the interchange between looking at both at the same time that we have also been able to clarify the Armenian, which is but Andy can correct me, which is clearly a translation from the Greek, but also with a number of misunderstandings of the Greek. And so that's a point where sort of both together can help to improve, in this case, mostly the Armenian. And in that case, I don't think there were feedback elements into the Greek, as far as I can remember.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And unless somebody has another question, please join me. Yes, Pietro Zaccaria. Go ahead, of course. Yes.
Thank you very much. Many thanks, Peter and Monica, for the presentation and the discussion. I'm looking forward to have the book in my hands. At this point, I have a question which stems from my little knowledge of these authors. And it concerns the use of testimonia. So as far as I understand, the book is a collection of fragments of chronicles or chronological works. But were these authors also authors of other works lost? And if so, have you included all the testimonia, also potentially concerning other works, or have you limited the testimonia to these names as authors of chronicles?
We are saved from your question by the fact that virtually all authors are only attested as authors of these chronicles. And in some cases, there is a little bit, or there can be discussion whether, for example, take the example of Andreas, which I've used quite often. It is possible to think that he wrote on the one hand the chronography, on the other hand an Easter table. But given the fact that other fragments or testimonies suggest that they probably were integrated, so we have collected all the material that is related to Andreas. There is one example, I mean, that's the pseudo Jacob of Nisibis, I think, to whom a large body of text are ascribed. But the only thing that was relevant for us was, I mean, the single testimony of the Viris Illustris, where it is said that he also wrote a chronicle. And then the rest of the tradition, of course, we have left aside, because that is also a completely different matter.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. And Monica, do you want to add a final note, or shall we just wrap it up?
Well, no. Well, anyway, the volume is, again, so read the introduction, because also for people without an expertise like myself in these specific authors, the introduction is really interesting to introduce into the topic, and also for its clear definition, not only of the project, but also of these complex genres and distinction between chronica and chronographies. And then just a final note about the edition. As you said, you used the usual practice of collecting fragments where you rely on the best editions of the citing authorities. And in fact, you don't have, let's say, a critical apparatus, but you have critical footnotes referring, of course, to, let's say, problematic passages, relying on the best editions, which is, I mean, a common practice. Because, of course, when you have a huge amount of sources and citing authorities, this is a consolidated practice. But yeah, so thank you.
And on this note, please join me in thanking once again Peter van Nuffelen and Monica Berti for this book in the spotlight. I really enjoyed it and I learned a lot. Thank you everybody for joining, and see you next time.